Right. Looks like we've got our stream going to Facebook. And I've got that we're just about there. Welcome, Debbie from San Angelo. All right. I have that we are right at 12:15, so we're going to get started. So again, welcome. And thank you all for joining us for today's webinar on education savings accounts. We're so glad you could be here today. My name is Stephanie McLaughlin, and I am the Training and Evaluation Specialist with Partners Resource Network. Partners Resource Network is the nonprofit agency that operates the Texas statewide network of parent training and information centers. We are funded through the Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs. And throughout Texas, you may know us by our project names of PACT, PATH, PIN, and TEAM. Our mission here at Partners Resource Network is to empower and support Texas families and individuals impacted by disabilities or special healthcare needs. And also joining me today from Partners Resource Network is our Director of Statewide Services, Christina Henning, and our technology specialist, Zach Hidalgo. If you're having any technical difficulties, be sure and reach out to Zach in the chat box and he can help you. For those of you that are needing a certificate of attendance, you will be receiving an email to thank you for attending today's webinar. You can follow the link in the email to get your certificate of attendance. At the end of today's presentation, we will have a time for question and answers. If you're joining us on Zoom, please type your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you're joining us on Facebook, you can type your questions in the comments and we'll be sure and get those. We are recording today's webinar, and a recording will be available on our Facebook page as well as our website at prntexas.org. All right, so without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker and turn it over to her. Today's speaker is Colleen Potts. Colleen currently serves as the supervising attorney for the education team at Disability Rights Texas, where she oversees a statewide team of advocates and attorneys. Before practicing law, she earned her BA in psychology from the University of New Mexico and her MA in marriage and family therapy from Friends University. Colleen was a practicing marriage and family therapist at a family preservation agency and had her own private practice prior to attending law school. She earned her JD from Texas Tech School of Law, where she served on the Board of Barristers as vice president of the Texas Tech Health Lawyers Association and on the national mock trial team. Colleen earned awards such as the Advanced Moot Court Best Oralist, Advanced Mock Trial Best Oralist, Moot Court Best Oralist, and the Cali Award in Bioethics, Healthcare Bioethics Mediation, and Criminal Practice Skills. After law school, Colleen earned an Equal Justice Works Fellowship, where she represented students with disabilities in the juvenile justice and juvenile probation systems in education issues. While at Disability Rights Texas, Colleen has represented students in hundreds of districts across the state and has presented at conferences locally, as well as at the state and national level. Colleen, welcome. We're so glad to have you. I'm going to let you share your screen and take it from here.
All right, thank you. It looks like I have to send a request to share my screen, so I did that. But we will get started while I'm given the right credentials to share my screen.
You should be able to share now.
Okay, let's try it again. There we go. Okay. So thank you for joining me. This is a little bit different. Usually we're talking about IDEA, 504, all of the things that we know that we've been practicing in the realm of for years. And all of a sudden, Texas decides to throw us this kink in the armor with education savings accounts that none of us know anything about. So all of the information today is going to be new to me as we got ready for this presentation and a couple of others. Question and answer session afterwards. It's going to be interesting because there's not a lot of answers, but a lot of questions. So we'll get through it together and hopefully help families make some good decisions about this possibility for their students. So just to get started, we have a couple goals for today. Certainly we want to get you the information to make a decision about what's right for your client, your student, your kiddo. But we want to take a look back, not get too deep into the history of education savings accounts or vouchers, as you might have heard them called. But we'll take a little bit of a look at kind of how we got here in our state. We're going to talk a little bit about how these accounts are going to work. That includes not only the eligibility, the lottery system, how the accounts are going to be funded, all of those fun things. We'll walk through all of those. But before we get started, just a quick couple of slides about Disability Rights Texas. Hopefully everybody's heard about us, but there's one in every state across the nation. We're the protection and advocacy system for the state of Texas. So that means we have the privilege of representing Texans with disabilities in all areas of the law where discrimination is possible. You can learn a lot more about all of the great work we do on the website and take a look at some, whether it's template letters or handouts or information packets, just a lot of great resources on our website. Can't speak it up enough. We are a free legal services unit, so we provide direct legal services to some of our clients. We work in different systems and institutions across the state and facilities to protect the rights of individuals in those systems, including the court and justice system. We have a whole policy team that does important work at the Capitol, informing and educating the legislature about how decisions like education savings accounts will impact real families across Texas, and do some education piece there. We do referrals if there's a case that we can't take for full services, making sure we get some information to people about other resources across the state, or at least providing some short-term legal advice. Here are all of the different areas that we have teams of dedicated advocates and attorneys working on across the state. We do have a couple brick and mortar offices left across the state, but based out of Austin, and I'm in the Lubbock office. So, like we said on the goals slide, we're going to kind of take a look back and see kind of where this all started. The last couple of legislative sessions, there's been this idea floating around, and it's been called a couple of different things. Vouchers is probably the most common in the media, and that really started years ago, but it was this session, obviously, that got us started on the path that we're on now. It was a bill, Senate Bill 2, that was introduced by then Chair Brandon Creighton, and that name might sound familiar for anybody in or around the Lubbock area because he's now at Texas Tech University. But he's the one that entered this bill and kind of talked it up and got the attention of it passed. And so now for next school year, obviously not this school year, it'll go into effect for the 26-27 school year. We're all of a sudden working with not only TEA, TEA's not administering the accounts, they're not overseeing the program. They have a lot more to do with it when there are students with disabilities, but the Texas Comptroller has entered the chat. We've worked with TEA for years, myself almost 20 years now, whether that's filing complaints or pulling data, looking at guidance and regulations. We kind of come to expect, we know what to expect from TEA. The Texas Comptroller is a whole new ballgame for all of us. I've never had anything to do with the Comptroller's office, so we have no idea what to expect on how they're going to manage this program. So it'll be, again, a lot of unknowns, but it'll be interesting to see how this goes. Like we talked about, obviously won't start until this coming up school year. The application process opened back in February and it closes in a couple of weeks on March 17th. Now, the good thing about that is it's not a first come, first serve. So if you're considering joining this program, don't panic because you're not behind, even though over 130,000 families have already applied. So it's not a first come, first serve. Those first 130,000 aren't, going to get a jump on you if you haven't applied yet. So plenty of time in these couple of weeks to think if this is right for you. All right, so we're going to walk through the process of these accounts only for students with disabilities. So we're going to focus on a couple of different things that parents with students with disabilities, a couple of extra hoops that they have to jump through, if you will, compared to a typically developing peer that does not receive services. So we're going to talk about what the eligibility looks like. We're going to talk about the application information, what you need to have ready to go when you log on to apply. We're going to talk about a lottery system that's going to be triggered if the amount of slots are taken by the amount of applicants. So if there's more applicants than there are available slots, that lottery system kicks in, and we'll talk about that. We're also going to talk about funding of those ESAs, or how many dollars will go into those accounts. And then, maybe most importantly, we're going to share a little bit about Disability Rights Texas's concerns with the ESA program and students with disabilities, kind of the information we want parents to know before they make this decision. Okay, so first we're going to talk about the eligibility. The good news is no new definitions, no new criteria. It's simply the same definition that if your child meets eligibility for special education services in public school, then they meet eligibility to be considered a child with a special education student for purposes of the ESA program. So that's good. No new acronyms, no new definitions to learn, just the same old thing. Interestingly enough, though, there's a lot of similarities in the law for students that are served under IDEA and 504. They get a lot of the same protections. In this education savings account program, they are treated very differently. If your student has a 504 plan and is served under Section 504, they are not considered a student with a disability for the purposes of being a SPED student in this program. So that's very different, and that's an important difference, in really thinking through, especially in the funding of the account, of how much money would be put in the account if your student is a 504 student. And we'll kind of get to the funding issue in a minute. So again, where do we start? We start with, like we always start, at the beginning with an FIIE. So if your student has not yet been evaluated for special education, the clock is ticking, because when we talk about application and all of that kind of stuff, you're going to need an FIIE and a current IEP. So the interesting thing about this is it's kind of like COVID. Remember when everybody was scrambling with services and how are we going to evaluate students in a shutdown of schools? Nobody extended the deadlines to do an evaluation. So the deadlines for an initial evaluation are still set in stone. It's still the 45 days and then the 30 days. So nothing's been extended. The district still has the same responsibilities under Child Find to fully evaluate your student. But it's interesting. We're going to talk a little bit about the application process. If your student is not yet evaluated and doesn't have an IEP, we're going to talk about that in a minute when we get to the application process. But just know that if your student's already being served, has a current IEP, you're good to go. And that's going to be the most important thing regarding the eligibility and the application. So when you do go to apply, you're going to log on to the educationfreedom.texas.gov website, and you're going to need to be ready to show Social Security information for the parent, for the student, your tax return, some information about residency, driver's license, all of the things like that. And it's a little bit flexible, kind of like schools are with proving residency. If you don't have a current driver's license or state ID, there are some other ways to show that you are who you are and you live where you live. The interesting thing about the website too, we'll talk a little bit more about one of its options, but kind of in this beginning phase of when you're learning if this is right for your family or not, they do have an interactive map of where the already approved districts are located. So right now there's over 2,000 approved schools across the state, and you can kind of use that map to see how many are near you. Now, the bad news about that, 2,000 schools sounds like a lot, and it is, but over half of those are in the Dallas or Houston areas alone. So Dallas and Houston certainly has the bigger density of those approved schools ready to go for these accounts, and not a lot in some of the more rural areas across the state. So that's one way to kind of play with the map to see what your options are about which schools are already approved and ready to receive that account money. So we talked about some of the student information that you need, all of the things to, again, prove residency, make sure that your student's ready to go. It's almost like you're enrolling them for a typical school year. So a lot of the same information that you would need when you first enroll your student. Okay, so here's where we get to a little bit of the tweak. So that's all of the things you need, but if your student does not have a current IEP or an FIIE from a school, so they're not currently receiving special education services, there's the option to file what's called, or to fill out and upload what's called a TEFA, Disability Certification Form. So this TEFA form is specially created, we've never seen it before, for this purpose. And it goes to a physician, talks about all of the different things about a diagnosis, how the diagnosis impacts your student, some of the symptomatology, things like you see on any other kind of certification form when it's related to proving a disability. So that's an option for parents that have not yet received a full report back after requesting an evaluation. It's also an option for students on a 504 plan. And so that gives you kind of a different way of getting into that prioritization for the application. What's important to note, we haven't gotten to the funding yet, remember, so we're not talking dollars yet. The disability certification form will not impact how much money goes into your account. This is simply for the application process and the prioritization process. So I want to keep the application part and the funding part separate because they are two very different systems in this program. So again, this is just for optional documentation to apply and to get priority. So again, in order to make it a little bit easier, again, we've got a new, in addition to the new disability certification form, we've got a newly created Education Freedom Account IEP. So that's what EFA stands for on the slide. I think the best way to describe an EFA IEP, besides alphabetic soup, is that it's kind of like an IEP light. It's not going to be as detailed and as robust as a typical IEP would be, but it's only used for the purpose of this process of applying. So again, this would be an option for parents who don't yet have a real IEP from their district, or if your student hasn't been found eligible by an ARD committee yet for special education services. So again, that EFA IEP or the IEP Lite can only be used when the district doesn't have their own IEP yet under the IDEA. Okay, so EFA IEP is different than a regular IEP. And again, we're still talking about application and priority. We're not talking about funding yet. And so again, the EFA, it doesn't have to have all of the parts that you're used to seeing in your IEP. So don't, panic if your neighbor's IEP looks different than your new Education Freedom Account IEP. It is going to be different. Okay, so let's say that you do decide that you want to apply for your student. The very first thing you need to do is tell your home school district in writing, because remember, nothing happens unless it's in writing, that you plan on applying for the education savings account. It's important to get it in writing. We're going to talk a little bit about why. So be sure it's done by email, some way that you can track to be sure that the request is documented. In that email, when you trigger the district knowing that you're going to apply, you want to ask the district to send your student's current IEP to the ESA program. So you go through the application process, you upload it yourself. This is an extra step for parents. You've got to reach out to your district and have them upload it. It goes to a different system to make sure that your child is eligible for the program. Now, the burden that seems to be placed on parents is that districts are behind in doing this. So we've heard that parents aren't getting confirmation that the district has done this, and they're not yet fully applied to the program because the district is maybe sitting on a stack of these that they need to upload into the system that they use. So again, you want to be sure to stay on top of them, that they upload your student's current IEP to the system that they use, separate from the application that you're going to complete. Because in order to fund that account, not only do they have to have your application as a parent, the system also has to receive the current IEP from the district. So there's, again, two different parts to the application process. But for some reason, of course, the burden lies on the parent's shoulders, it seems, to keep up with their district to make sure that they've applied. Recently, too, I also heard of some problems verifying the unique ID number of a student. And so I think on some of the special education template forms that they use, that number will be on some of your IEPs, but sometimes you might have to call the campus directly to get that unique ID number during the application process. Okay, so let's talk about, you've done the application, the school system's uploaded the IEP, everybody's done their part, but there's way more participants across the state than what the legislature has allocated money for. So now we're going to enter into this lottery system. So the lottery system is going to be used to give preference to different groups of students. This year, it's kind of strange, the three groups that we've got, because we've got already participating students, which nobody's already participating. So that's kind of a moot point for this year. That would kick in maybe next school year. Students who previously ceased participation in the program and now want to come back to the program. Again, that doesn't really matter this year because nobody's been in the program yet. So maybe that would be a lottery slot that would be applicable for next school year. The third one is if there are siblings that are participating in the program. So if you've got multiple students that you're applying for, the lottery would give a family with multiple siblings priority in the lottery system. Now, within each of those groups, the real preference that the legislature was very clear about is that they want to prioritize families that are below 500% of the federal poverty guidelines. That is a calculation that's difficult to do. And when we first heard about priority for lower income families, we were excited. There's plenty of families across the state that cannot access private placement in schools that they would otherwise love to have their children go to. And so we were excited that these families would now be prioritized to have that option. Well, 500% of the federal poverty guidelines for a family of 4 is $160,000 a year of income. So that's a lot of money, and that's a lot of families across the state of Texas. So we're not talking about families on a very, very tight income, whether it's $50,000 a year or even $100,000 a year. It's over $160,000 a year for a family of 4. So it's not really focused on the demographic that we were excited would be prioritized in this. It's not really focused on those truly low income families. The definition of poverty is a little bit different than what we expected when we first saw when we were watching this lottery be created. So again, there are a couple different ways to show that your student qualifies for the lottery system. This is again another way. You'll get preference if you have the disability certification, the FIIE, and the IEP. And then talking about the IEP Lite. So just remember that's a little bit different than a regular IEP when we're talking about the lottery system. Okay, so again, the school district's part of this, remember we talked about they're going to have to upload the current IEP into the system, and this is for funding purposes, not for application purposes. That's going to go to the Texas Education Agency, and then that information will then go to the comptroller's office. So it's a little bit of a hot potato where that IEP goes, and we're hoping it all works well. But anytime you have another system or entity that's involved in making this happen, there is another place for potential breakdown. So what could go wrong with a school district uploading documents to TEA and then TEA sending documents to the comptroller's office? And then we'll kind of talk about what everybody now wants to know about is the amount of the ESA. So you went through the application process. Let's say you were prioritized in the lottery. You were notified that you have a slot, and now you want to know, well, how much money is going to be in this account? How much money am I going to have to spend? Well, basically what the legislature wanted to do is make it fair for the amount of dollars that are being sent to the school to educate your child. They wanted to make that about equal to the amount of dollars that you would have in your education savings account. So it came out that base amount is about 85% of the estimated cost of educating a student in school. Now that's, again, that base cost without proving any extra need, which we'll talk about in a second. So that base cost is $10,474. So that's the minimum of what would be funded to an ESA for a student with a disability, is what we're talking about here today, because in addition to that $10,474, some students that receive special education services can be eligible for up to $30,000 in that account. That's the cap. So that's a big difference, right? The difference between $10,474 and $30,000 is a lot of money. We'll talk a little bit about how they're going to figure out that difference, but just know you've got your parameters. You've got your base amount, you've got the least amount of money you can count on, and the most amount of money that you can expect. So now we'll kind of talk about, well, how do I know where in between my kid is going to fall? So the amount of money is really based off of the instructional arrangement codes. That's not typically what the language that parents are used to. I think what parents are used to is a PEIMS code. So it's really looking at the placement or the schedule of services that you'll see on your IEP. That's going to determine what kind of services are being provided in public education that they're going to try to replicate in the account. So the comptroller's office is going to look at that instructional arrangement or that PEIMS code provided. Remember, it goes from the school district to TEA to the comptroller's office. So the comptroller is going to look at that code that's coming from TEA to determine the funding amounts for the accounts. Okay, so after you figure out that all out, so now you've applied, you got your priority set, you figured out, you've uploaded everything, the school sent the things to TEA that they need to send, and the comptroller's office is figuring out how much money is going to be in your account. What can you spend the money on? And this is a part of the program that I think a lot of people misunderstand. It's not just for private education. It's not just for tuition and fees. certainly included, but that's not it. It doesn't stop there. It could be anything from educational technology. It could be devices that the student has at school, software that they download on the devices, testing fees, career technology fees, therapeutic services, all of those different things that could qualify. Also, what I think a lot of people don't think about is transportation could be funded by these dollars. Uniform expenses could be funded by these dollars, meals. But all of those dollars have to be paid to an approved vendor on the website. So this is not, I made my kid 37 bologna sandwiches, so now I want to be reimbursed for my bologna and cheese. It's not money that goes to the parent for meals. It's not, I had to drive 30 miles one way 5 times a week, to take my child to school, and now I want my gas reimbursed. It has to be an approved vendor that the money gets paid to. So that's important when you think it's not going to pay for your Target run for last minute uniforms. It's going to be an approved vendor that provides the uniforms through the private school more than likely. But again, the vendor list is on the website. You can look that over if you have a private conversation with the school about what vendors do you use for meals, what vendors do you use for transportation. You can make sure that they match up with the already approved ones. Okay, here's the real big, we'll see how this works out slide. So we talked about the application period ends the 17th of March, which is in just a couple of weeks. And in 2 weeks, the state of Texas is going to review and approve over 100, we know that 130,000 families have already applied. So in 2 weeks, the state's going to review all those applications, filter all of them through the priority process, and decide which ones are going to be funded, because you're going to get your funding notification in early April. We'll see. I don't know what to expect about 130,000 applications being screened and approved in 2 weeks. That's just wild for me to comprehend, but the state says they're going to do it. So we'll see. So you've done all the things. Now your account, you're notified that you are approved and that your dollars will be in your account. That's supposed to come in early April. Again, more responsibility for the parents. The parents are going to notify the administration of the private school that you choose, and then the school has to confirm that they are accepting your student and accepting the money from your account. So again, more responsibility from the parent. Has to be a lot of communication up front. We'll talk a little bit about some steps to take before choosing a private school in a second. But then there are other date points throughout the year where the full funding of the account will happen. So it's not an all at once dump into an account. It does come over the school year in different parts. What we do know is that if this is something that works for your student in the 26-27 school year and you want to continue it in the 27-28 school year, you don't have to go through the rigorous reapplication process that we're talked about in this session. But you do have to remain in an accredited private school. It has to be one of the approved schools, and you're going to have to fill out a reapply application form, kind of like a certification form, that you're continuing in the correct school and that you want to continue in the program. We don't know what that's going to look like yet, but assuming it'll come out sometime in this school year. So keep an eye out for that. Okay, so real quick, when we're talking, not real quick, because this is really important. I don't know why I left it till the very last, but when we're thinking about making this decision for kids, what we need to think about is this really accessible to all students in the state of Texas? Some of the main concerns we have is the application process accessible? We've been hearing different problems about screen readers not being able to go through the entire application process. for applicants, parents that are visually impaired and rely on a screen reader. So problems with accessibility right at the off out of the gate, maybe. We're also concerned about immigration. If a child is a citizen and a parent has all of the appropriate documentation that we saw is needed to apply, what if the parent has a questionable immigration status? Do they really want to upload all of that information into a database that's going to be sent from TEA to the comptroller's office, and all of that personal information onto a computer is a little bit overwhelming sometimes when you have some immigration concerns. And then, like we talked about, the majority of the approved private schools are in Dallas and Houston. Well, what happens to students in Lubbock and Amarillo, or even more rural than Lubbock or Amarillo, that there's just not a private school, maybe even in their entire county? Is that really, does that make the program accessible to all Texas students? Absolutely not. Another concern is that a lot of these private schools have no mandate to enroll, which means your child find is out the window. There's no mandate to enroll, there's no mandate to evaluate, there's no mandate to serve. So we'll get a little bit more into that, but just remember that a lot of these schools these private schools can discriminate in the application process. Another one of our concerns is the leftover tuition costs. We've talked a lot about the burden that's going to be placed on parents' shoulders, and this is another one. If your account gets funded with that basic $10,000, but the tuition for a private placement is $15,000, you, the parent, you're on the hook for that extra $5,000. I don't know if private schools will raise tuition after this school year. We don't know if that basic number is going to increase. It's just anyone's guess about what's going to happen with tuition costs, but we do know for a fact that parents are left with whatever's left over. And that includes uniforms, transportation, sometimes meals are not included in private placement. So really important questions to ask when you're thinking about using a private school. And then, of course, some of the biggest concerns is I talked earlier about how we've used TEA over the years. School districts have to upload a bunch of different data to TEA every year. So we're talking about, we can get records on how many kids are restrained on campuses. We can ask how many the percentage of special education students in the most restrictive environment compared to the least restrictive environment, life skills versus general ed. We can pull data on all of that stuff because districts are mandated by TEA to report that. A lot of that data is not required from private schools. So we won't be able to track a lot of the things that we can track in public schools. So that's certainly a concern of ours. And then, we don't yet know what the impact of public schools is going to be. We've heard everything from, this is going to be horrible for public schools to it'll be a drop in the bucket, they won't even notice, and everything in between. So the real impact to public education in the state of Texas is yet to be seen, and is just a big unknown. And then perhaps our biggest concern is IDEA and 504. So if the private school that you go to, that you choose for your student, they don't have to follow IDEA and 504 like the public schools do, because they're not receiving that federal funding. What that means for parents is that you give up your right to file a TEA complaint for failure to provide FAPE, that free appropriate public education. You give up your right to file OCR complaints if your kid's 504 plan isn't being implemented correctly, or if there's discrimination or a lack of investigation on bullying claims. Parents lose all of that when they move to a private school setting. Now, there are a couple of different areas that do provide anti-discrimination protection. what we can say is that non-religious private schools, so if the private school you choose is not a religious entity, they cannot discriminate on the basis of disability. But if it's a private school that's owned or controlled by a religious organization, they're not even subject to ADA. So again, we're talking about basic accessibility to a building, basic participation rights of people with disabilities. If it's a private school owned by a religious organization, they're not required to follow the ADA like we're used to seeing in a lot of other public entities across the state and in our communities. So again, they don't have the same IDEA mandate. It's simply about reasonable modifications. Those aren't modifications like we're used to thinking and hearing about in IEP goals and things. Those are modifications that don't pose an undue burden or fundamentally alter the nature of the school's services. So gone is that, but my kid needs that modification. Gone is the individuality. They're simply going to look at, does the requested modification, is it reasonable, and does it impact at the bottom line what the school's services are? And then there is a part under state law, private schools are subject to the Texas Human Resources Code about some disability discrimination, and you can kind of look there. And again, that reasonable word that we're not really sure what it means, and then fundamentally alter the school services. That's kind of that's the test for that modification. Okay, so after all of that, let's say that you want to apply. Again, go to the comptroller's website, find the TEFA school near you, use that interactive map feature, contact that private school quickly. Make sure you talk about what is your policy and procedure regarding special education services, because remember, you're not governed by IDEA or 504 anymore. You're kind of at the mercy of what that private school's policy and procedures state. So of course, we're worried about kids getting suspended or expelled because of manifestations of their disability. No MDR, nothing like that. No requirement for FBAs and behavior plans and all of those things. All of that information is going to be in their policies and procedures. So that's why it's super important once you are thinking about picking a school that you really dig deep into some of their documentation. How are they going to discipline your student with an emotional disability when they become dysregulated in the classroom? Those are all kinds of questions that are going to be up to the individual schools to answer for you now that IDEA is no longer a protection. So again, they've got a couple of different resources for questions. If you have a general question, they're saying to send it to educationfreedom.texas.gov. They have a chat feature on the website. There's an email. If you're having problems getting your school to upload that IEP into the APEX system, which is the system that the districts will use to upload your child's IEP, then they want you to reach out to sped@tea.texas.gov. And then APEX questions, those are only for schools. Remember, parents aren't going to mess with the APEX system. That's for the school to upload documentation. They've got a resource there as well. What the TEFA website says is that if you have questions, you can call SpedTex or go on their website and ask questions as a resource to parents. That's what they're providing. And then certainly we're here for our online intake system. We have phone intakes. We're in a little bit of a weird spot about what cases to accept because we serve students that are in the public education system. So getting a student into a private school is not something we would do. But certainly if you're having problems with the district evaluating your student, having an updated ARD meeting to update the IEP, those are still public school responsibilities that we might be able to get involved and take a look at to be sure that the schools are still, following the mandates that have not changed with the creation of this program. So of course, we are a nonprofit. We would love to be a part of your yearly giving, different ways to support us. But most importantly, check out our YouTube channel, follow us on the socials, and go to the website because we've got a lot of great information, including a new handout about education savings accounts that will have up-to-date information, although things keep I was teasing Stephanie that I didn't want to get my slides in too early because everything seems to be moving so fast with this that it seems to change from day to day, that we get more guidance or we hear of another issue. So we'll update the handout online if there are any substantive changes to anything or if we hear of really bad problems. But certainly it's a good start for some general information, just like what today we're offering. So that was a lot. That's a lot of information and a lot of unknown. But yeah, so happy to spend a couple minutes taking some questions.
Absolutely. We have quite a few questions. Just as a reminder, if you've got a question for Colleen, please put it in the Q&A box. The chat is very active, so it's hard to keep up with all the questions in chat. So if you'll put it in that Q&A box, it'll be easier for me to find it. So we're going to try to answer as many of your questions as we can get answered in our time. Several people have asked the question, what if my child is undocumented? Are they eligible?
So again, I think questionable immigration status, there's lots of different definitions in immigration issues, undocumented, all the different things. I don't practice immigration law, so I do know that there are alternate ways other than a social security number to apply, but certainly be careful and make a decision that's best for your family regarding, what information you're releasing out in to computer world. We don't want a family to put immigration status at risk by applying to the program.
Absolutely. So along those same lines, if a child does not have a social security card, what other documentation can they use?
Okay, so again, when we looked at the slide about that, there is a requirement for a social security number for the child. There's different options for parent residency documentation. Remember, if they don't have a driver's license or a state ID, but I believe the application process will require a social security number for the parent and then for the child as well.
All right. So is this money available for post-high school programs?
Yes. So, well, let me change that. It depends. Remember, it has to be an approved vendor. But CTE services or career technology education is an approved expenditure with the dollars. It just has to be paid to an approved vendor.
Okay. And again, several questions on kind of the needs-based financial things. So can you kind of go over that again, like the percentage of the federal poverty line and kind of talk a little about that? Again, we've had several questions.
Very, very confusing. Basically, again, we were disappointed that the priority, not the eligibility, the priority is not given to what we consider truly low-income Texans. It's 500% of the federal poverty guidelines. So all you have to do is type into Google 500% of the poverty guidelines for a family of 10, for a family of 2, and it'll give you a dollar amount. If you make below that, if your household makes below that, you are prioritized, which sounds great, but it's going to be so many families that is it really a priority? $160,000 a year for a family of 4 is a lot of money. And so there's going to be a lot of families now that are meeting that priority. And when there's so many that qualify for the priority, is it really a priority? But you can Google that to find that exact number depending on how many people you have in your household. 500% of the federal poverty guidelines.
All right. So quite a few questions coming in. So let me try to kind of put it all into one question. If you decide to keep your child in public school, but you want to apply to use these, can they be used for tutoring outside of school, therapies like OT, PT, speech?
Okay, so no, the funding and the money will only come if you withdraw your student from public education. So if you keep your student in public school, the state's idea is that you're receiving all of the services you need in the public school system. So there's no reason to provide additional funds on top of that.
All right, some questions about behavior kind of related things. If the private school kicks your student out,
Great question.
what about that money?
You got me. I because, and I think it's an interesting question because again, it's going to depend. How did is your account funded a quarter of the percent? Have you received 50% of the funds? Have you made it through 50% of the school year? Does the money come back to you? Does it go back to the district because you have to re-enroll your student because they got expelled? I I don't know. Don't know.
Okay, so similar lines. So your child attends a private school, but they are not a participating school in the program. Could you receive funds in that case for tuition and, or not for tuition, but for tutoring and things like that?
No. In order for the comptroller to fund your account, it has to be with an approved vendor on their website. And there's that list, like we talked about, of approved schools. It has to be one of those in order to have that account funded.
All right, for parents that choose to homeschool, is that a set amount or can it go up based on the needs of the student?
That is a set amount. So it's a lot different than all of this placement, PEIMS code, instructional arrangement. It's just a flat fee that the account would be funded.
This is an interesting question. Do you have any lessons learned from other states that have already done programs like this?
That's probably a better question for our policy specialist, Stephen. I think Stephen did a lot of research prior to the last legislative session about what's gone right and what's gone wrong in other states. There are other states that say it works and it works great. And then you hear other horror stories about parents that didn't know they were giving up rights and not enough money to get the education their student needs. And so a lot of information floating around, but since we're a Texas organization, we just don't have that anecdotal data yet of what it looks like in practice.
All right, so somebody is asking if you qualify this year and you get X amount of dollars, will you just automatically receive that future years?
So we don't know because we don't know what that recertification form is going to look like. My guess is that not necessarily, because for two main reasons. First of all, your child's needs might have changed. And so this, once we see that form, my guess is that you have to reassert that instructional arrangement, the PEIMS code, the need to say if anything's changed or not. But then also we need to remember the next legislative session, they could pile more money into this pot. So they could raise the base amount that goes into accounts. They could raise the threshold from 30 to something different. So that money will fluctuate, is my guess, from year to year.
Hey, great question. For the TEFA, the TEFA form, do you need that actual form or can just a doctor's note with diagnosis be sufficient?
No, you need that disability certification form. It's a form that was created only for this purpose. It's not good anywhere else, so use that form.
I'm gonna get through all of them as much as I can. There's so many questions.
These are great. These are good questions.
Oh, excellent questions. So somebody said they unenrolled their child from school in December.
Okay.
Now, do they still need to get the IEP from the school sent in for the application?
Uh, Again, an answer I hate to give. It depends. If you unenrolled in December, but that IEP is still considered valid until February or November of next year, if you just had an IEP meeting before you withdrew, then there's no need to get an updated evaluation because technically you still have a current IEP.
All right, here's an interesting question. If you choose to homeschool your child and you would like those funds to come to you to be able to use however you see fit, would you need to be
Mm.
approved as a vendor, or do they have to be used for approved curriculums and therapies through a vendor already on the
So
system?
that's a great question. I do not know the process to become a vendor. I just know that the vendor list is on the website. So I don't know about a parent becoming a vendor. My guess is no. That would be really hard for the state to track, I imagine. But curriculum that you purchase online, that would probably be approved, all of those kinds of things.
All right, here's a great question. Being that the money is being distributed at different times and not all in one lump sum, if the private school requires a certain amount due at the beginning of the school year, will parents be required to pay that up front and then get reimbursed when money is put into the account?
Great question. And yes, the amount of money that's going to be deposited in an education savings account is those dates are not going to change if your school needs X amount of money up front. So again, when you're asking about policies and procedures for special education, talk about application fees. There's a lot of sometimes hidden application fees that private schools have that a parent might not be able to float at the very beginning. Some schools might say that they'll allow you to run like a tab, that they'll charge you in an account, but that they'll wait because these private schools know when the money is going to be distributed. So they know, okay, we're going to charge you X amount for an application fee, but we'll waive that until, we'll put that off and won't hold it against you until that first 25% is dumped into your account.
So, all right, some questions for our transition age and older students. So can these funds be used for 18 plus programs?
Not if the 18 plus program is at the public school system. So again, in order to receive any of these dollars, you have to fully withdraw your student from public education. So if they're in an 18 plus program at the local ISD, you are not eligible for an education savings account.
All right, and for those young adults that may be still in a school and going to a private school, but they're over 18, are they going to look at parents' income or just that adult student's income?
I am not used to working with private schools, so I have no idea how to answer that question. Although I do imagine that every private school could be different. So again, once you kind of narrow it down to a couple, start asking those questions to see what they require.
All right, so we've had some questions about homeschool, but what about homeschool co-ops? Can those funds be used for homeschool co-ops?
Again, I think it would depend on the vendor situation. The money wouldn't go to a co-op. The money would still go directly to the parents' account. And then what the co-op requires the parents to contribute or whatever is between the co-op and the parent. But the parent, don't forget, has the requirement to show that they're purchasing services from an approved vendor. At the end of the day, just be sure that you're spending those dollars on the approved vendors.
All right, so here's a good question. So this child is currently attending a private school. Their last IEP is several years old. Would they need to get some sort of more updated evaluation and IEP to submit to for the voucher since it's old? It's 21, so it's
Okay.
several years old.
I was going to ask it. I was going to say it depends because you could use the FIE and that could be up to 3 years old and still be eligible. So yes, unfortunately, I think the requirement is that you get reevaluated. That would be the requirement of the district to provide, where your public school district is. And that's kind of adding to this work that the district's doing. But remember, we're getting close to the deadline for applications. So if you get that process rolling now, you might want to look into the EFA IEP, that IEP light, to hold you over until the full report of the reevaluation comes back.
Okay, we've had some questions on taxes, so maybe address a little bit
Oh,
how that savings account goes. So a couple of questions. Do parents pay taxes on the money that goes into that account to go toward their child's schooling?
I do not think so, but I am not a tax attorney. And so I cannot speak to tax implications on things like that. But my guess is that no, as long as those dollars again are spent on an approved vendor, it's just simply the money switching hands. It's not considered income for purposes that I would assume. But again, not a tax attorney, so don't don't go on what I say. This is not legal advice, legal tax advice.
All right, and we're going to wrap up with one final question because we're right at time. So if somebody gets into the program and they start off doing homeschool, and next year they decide to go into a private school, will they need to reapply in order to get the increased funds, or can they just do something to get that change in funding after they've been approved?
Great question. And I don't think we know yet, but I'm going to give you my guess. Since we haven't seen that reapplication form, my guess is if you're going from homeschool to a private school, that's a completely different funding allotment. So you probably will have to go through that initial application process again to qualify for the actual private school tuition fund, not the homeschool fund.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Tried to catch as many questions, and if I saw it
Those
come
were
through
great
multiple times, I
questions.
tried to catch. So thank you all. Your questions were fantastic, and it's helping us to know what you're needing more information on, and that helps Colleen and her team there at Disability Rights Texas to know how to help families as much as possible. So thank you all for your questions. We're right at 1:15, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Colleen, thank you again so
You're
much for taking
welcome.
time and joining us and answering these questions and letting us feel a little more confident in our knowledge on this program.
We're all going to
We
go through
really
it
appreciate
together.
it. Absolutely. All right. So as we're wrapping up, one more time, thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to come and learn with us. So recording of the webinar today will be available on our website at prntexas.org, as well as our Facebook page. For those of you that will be needing a certificate of attendance, you will be receiving an email to thank you for attending today's webinar. You can follow the link in that email to get your certificate of attendance. And make plans to join us for our upcoming webinars that we have. We have practical behavior tips for a smooth after-school transition coming up on April 14th with special guest presenter, Dr. Stephanie Hart with West Texas A&M University. And then we have preventing learning loss when extended school year services make a difference on April 28th with our special guest presenter, Catherine King from Region 10 Education Service Center. And then coming up in May, we have Medicaid waivers in Texas on May 5th with special guest Courtney Carruthers with the Texas Health and Human Services Commission. You can register for those webinars on our website, prntexas.org. On the screen now is contact information for our Director of Statewide Services, Christina, and for myself. Please be sure and check out our website for information on upcoming webinars and events in your local regions, as well as lots of information for parents. You can follow and like us on social media, Facebook and X at PRN Texas. And thank you all again for joining us.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you, Colleen. We really appreciate it.
Anytime.
Have a wonderful day.